Hello everyone, this is Méndez speaking, and I'm going to present Evonne, a visual tool for explaining reasoning with OWL ontologies and supporting interactive debugging. This is joint work between two rather distinct research groups. On one hand, Christian Alrabbaa, Patrick Koopmann, and Baader from the Institute of Theoretical Computer Science worked on the domain of description logics. On the other hand, Ricardo Langner, Dachselt, and I from the Interactive Media Lab Dresden worked on the aspects of visualization and human-computer interaction. So first, from the side of description logics, here's the situation. We are working with OWL ontologies. OWL stands for Web Ontology Language. You can think of these ontologies as relational databases filled with axioms. This is what an axiom looks like. It is a logical construct which, in this example, says that a pizza is something that has a topping and a base. Consequences are our target. These are special axioms that are not explicitly written in the ontology, but they follow or can be derived from an ontology using a reasoner. These consequences can be unexpected, considering the size of the ontology and the complex reasoning steps that may be involved in deriving them. Furthermore, the consequences may be wrong, for example, if something was modeled incorrectly in the ontology. This means that we need a way to support the understanding of these consequences, and also a way to repair them when they are erroneous. To explain the consequences, we are going to use proofs. Proofs explain the reasoning process that generated a consequence as a series of steps or inferences. Starting from a justification, which in this case is the minimal set of axioms responsible for a consequence, a proof shows the reasoning steps that took place for the reasoner to compute the consequence. Additionally, we will make use of the concept of atomic decompositions. In essence, an atomic decomposition contains the minimal, relevant part of the ontology that is related to the justification. This will be particularly useful when we discuss repairing consequences, because it will let us show what parts of the ontology would be affected if we repair the consequence in a certain way. When it comes to working with ontologies, the default tool that is used is Protégé, alongside the plugins that the community develops to deal with the specific use cases, such as relating concepts within the hierarchy of the ontology, exploring dependencies, or editing the ontology. However, for our use case, the existing support was rather limited, with only a few exceptions to make note of. In the case of proofs, Kazakov and colleagues presented a plugin that shows the reasoning steps of the proof using an indented tree, similar to the ontology representations of Protégé. Atomic decompositions are also rare, with Alveskovo and colleagues using it to explore the structure of ontologies. The reason we use proofs and atomic decompositions together is that the atomic decomposition allows us to show only what is strictly necessary from the ontology to make sense of a consequence and eventually fix it. With that in mind, our goals are the following. First, we aim to improve on proofs as an explanation service by allowing the users to interact with them, manipulate them, and also relate them to their context in the ontology. Second, we aim to support the process of debugging or repairing the ontology, and we do so by helping users assess the impact of possible repairs through comparison and filtering. Of course, there are other sub-goals that follow from these. To give some examples, explanation services should always support different preferences of stakeholders of various levels of expertise, and they should remain familiar to representations and technologies that are comfortable to our target users. Okay, so what did we do? To reach those goals, we developed Evonne. It is a web-based application that has two main views, a proof view, which is not surprising, and an ontology view, where we use the atomic decomposition. We made it so that each of these views can be loaded in separate browser tabs or separate devices, and they remain synchronized through a project identifier. We did this with the intent of supporting diverse setups and screen configurations. More so, we provide Evonne in a complete package using Docker for local installations, and if you would like to try it, we have an online demo at imld.de/Evonne, and the source code is available on GitHub. Now, let's take a closer look at each of the views. In the proof view, we display proofs using different layouts. The default layout, currently shown on the screen, is a hypertree with the root at the bottom and the leaves towards the top of the screen. The nodes of this hypertree contain either axioms or reasoner rules that are used to compute the next steps of the proof. We use the following color coding to indicate the types of nodes in the proof. Green nodes correspond to the axioms of the justification, which again are the axioms that come directly from the ontology and are responsible for the consequence. Gray nodes represent the rules that were applied at each inference to compute the axioms below. If one wants to inspect a rule, clicking on it reveals a rule explanation tooltip that details how the rule was applied, as it is now shown in the bottom left corner of the screen. blue nodes, contain the inferred axioms which were computed in the intermediate steps between the justification and the final conclusion. And lastly, the root node is made to stand out with purple and pink to remind us that it is the consequence under inspection. For both the proof and the ontology views, we provide expected features for navigation and exploration of node-link diagrams. You can pan, zoom, adjust the vertical and horizontal space that the diagrams take. You can orient using minimaps when the structures overflow the screen, all the typical features. Things get a little bit more interesting when we talk about expanding and collapsing, because we have to consider how is it that logicians actually read the proofs. Do they start from the justification and follow each rule until they reach the consequence? This would be a top-down approach. Or perhaps, do they start from the consequence and ask themselves, how did we get here until the whole tree has been traversed? What would be a bottom-up approach? We found that the answer to this is different from user to user, and it sometimes depends on the proof itself. If it's too wide or too broad, maybe it's unbalanced, etc. Doubling down on the idea of supporting reading preferences, we provide two additional layout modes. The linear layout, currently shown on the screen, resembles the way proofs are written in paper, with an axiom on each line until the final conclusion can be reached. By default, this indicates a top-down approach to reading the proofs. But our users also found themselves exploring this layout starting from the root, as with the previous layout. This linear mode is also particular in the sense that, because everything is aligned in the y-axis, explicitly showing the gray nodes with the reasoner rules would occupy too much vertical space. So here, we provide an additional option to the axiom nodes to highlight individual inferences, which, as shown here in the screenshot, makes transparent everything except the inference leading to the selected axiom, and shows the tooltip from before. Additionally, one can question if there is a better way to sort the axioms vertically. As in the currently shown version on the left, there are many edge intersections which could lead to confusion. Therefore, we also provide an option to separate the axioms and avoid edge intersections, which was also deemed useful by some of our users. Now, while the question of reading directions remains open, we designed a final layout mode that combines both directions simultaneously. We call this a bidirectional layout, or magic mode, and I'll get to why in a moment. The layout starts like this, directly connecting the green justification axioms above to the consequence at the bottom through a special rule denoted here as a magic rule. Each axiom in this mode has up to 4 buttons that allow either expanding parts of the tree by pulling them from the magic node or collapsing them by pushing the parts onto the existing magic nodes. It is possible to have multiple magic nodes at the same time, which allows users to focus only on specific parts of the proof. As motivated before, this exploration mechanism allows users to read the proof in both directions simultaneously and on demand. The reason we call this a magic mode is Arthur C. Clarke's quote that magic is just science we don't understand yet, though in our case, the magic is simply science that we don't show yet. But okay, that's it for the proof view. Let's now talk about the ontology view. In the atomic decomposition that we show in the ontology view, what we see is a node-link diagram of a directed acyclic graph. In this diagram, the nodes are called atoms, and each of them have a set of related axioms like the ones you see in this screenshot. The links, on the other hand, represent a dependency relation that in essence tells us that if you modify one of the child nodes, all the nodes that led to it all the way to the first parent would also be affected. As you can imagine, the atoms can contain an arbitrary amount of axioms inside, which is why we provide a signature mode that allows for text reduction. In the ontology that I'm showing in these 2 screenshots, you can see the effect of this reduction by comparing the nodes before and after activating the signature mode. Instead of showing the whole set of axioms, we show each of the concept names that were used in the original axioms only once. Lastly, the blue color here continues with the encoding that I talked about before, referring to how these atoms were computed in relation to the justification. There are other colors that show up in the ontology view, but they appear when we perform linked interactions from the proof view. So let's talk about that. What we want to do is relate the proof to the ontology. In each of the axioms of the proof view, we provide 2 buttons that appear on double-click to trigger effects on the ontology view. The first linked interaction locates parts of the justification in the ontology view, and the second triggers the computation of diagnosis that we can use to repair the consequence. Both of these effects are triggered with respect to the justification nodes that can be reached from the selected axiom in the proof view. So for example, if you trigger them from the root node, then the entire justification will be considered, as shown in this little schematic. But if you trigger these interactions from a subbranch, only the part of the justification reachable from the subbranch will be considered. To show these effects in more detail, here on the left you can see a consequence node from the proof view, showing the two buttons that I was talking about. The magnifying glass button highlights the justification on the ontology view. The atoms that contain the justification axioms turn green, just like the justification nodes from the proof view, and the text on the specific axioms is also highlighted to indicate where they are. On the other hand, the wrench button triggers the computation of diagnoses that can be used to repair the consequence. The diagnoses are listed on the sidebar on the right, so that users can hover over them and see which axioms would need to be removed from the ontology, as well as which atoms would be affected by applying such a repair. This is where the atomic decomposition really shines, as we know that no other part of the ontology can be affected by any of the repairs we do here. Besides the blue color for the remaining atoms, the color gray is used for locking atoms, which is a mechanism to filter diagnoses. By locking an atom, the user is indicating that the axioms within said atom should not be changed, and the diagnoses that involve removing such axioms are filtered out of the list. With that, I finished a small walkthrough of the features we provide in Evonne. To evaluate the tool, we performed a qualitative user study with 16 participants, all with notable expertise in ontologies, proofs, and description logics. We provided a link to access Evonne so that the participants would use it from their typical work environments in a video conference. First, we walked them through a tutorial of how to use the tool with a toy example and allowed them to ask us questions. Then, we gave the participants a series of tasks with different proofs computed from a real-life ontology from BioPortal. It is worth noting that this experiment did not rely in any way on the content of the ontology, as our participants are logicians and not biomedical experts. The participants would then follow a think aloud protocol as they configured the screen usage using our provided settings and explored the various proofs looking for artifacts and trying to make sense of the different layouts. We interviewed the participants for their preferred reading directions in each of the layouts, preferred navigation methods and configurations, the usability of our approach to provide context and facilitate debugging, as well as their opinion on the various features that Evonne provides. We also asked them to tell us how Evonne would integrate into their current work environments. Lastly, we gave the participants the well-established user experience questionnaire, and this figure shows the results. Without going into details, we received very positive feedback for all the categories, which is why there is a lot of blue tones in this figure. This evaluation led to several improvements that were already implemented into Evonne, while also helping us determine the future directions to follow. The results were overall very positive, and there was a lot of interest in continuing with the project. To give you some examples, the features that helped users with less expertise and the magic mode were hot topics in this discussion. Now, to close up this talk, I have a few takeaways and closing thoughts for you. What Evonne does is it relates a reasoning process to its context using modern visualization techniques. We claim that in order to really understand the reasoning process of such complexity, it is necessary to be able to explore it in a comfortable way that adapts to the user's preferences and expertise, and this understanding should be coupled with the ability to correct mistakes that come to light because of it. Referring back to our goals to create better explanation services, we are happy to report that Evonne has by now been used successfully in teaching activities, meaning that users of different levels of expertise are interacting with this domain more comfortably, which is of course a good goal for any explanation service to have. The overarching fields of knowledge representation and automated reasoning, which are what we are working with here, are subfields of artificial intelligence that are often overlooked by the current trend of developing explainability. The reason for this is that these domains are explainable by design. You can always compute an explanation for the outcome of a reasoning process. The problem is that these explanations are often so difficult to digest, even for experts, which is why, similar to Evonne, there is a growing need for better explanation services. One way to enhance those services is through the systematic combination, application, and adaptation of visualization techniques, just like we did here in Evonne. That's it. On behalf of the whole author group, I invite you again to visit Evonne's website at imld.de/Evonne, and I thank you very much for listening to the talk.